Let's find the big button, okay, sweetheart? The tech support agent chirped at me. His voice was all bright colors and condescension, meant for a senile old woman who couldn't find her own keyboard. He had no idea he was talking to the architect of the entire system he was failing to support. The morning light was soft, filtered through the oak tree outside my office window. It illuminated the dust motes dancing over my desk, a wide, sturdy plank of walnut I'd owned for 40 years. The air smelled of Earl Grey tea and old paper. From the closet down the hall, I could hear the faint, familiar hum of my personal server rack. It was a comfortable sound. I settled into my chair, the leather groaning in protest. My morning routine was simple. I drank my tea. I read the news, and then I would log into the alumni portal for my old company. It wasn't just for nostalgia. My pension records were there, and I liked to keep an eye on the technical forums. It was like tending a garden I had planted long ago, just to see how the new owners were managing the weeds. This morning, the garden wall was closed. I typed my password, a complex string I'd used for decades, and hit enter. The login wheel spun and spun. Then it stopped, replaced by a small, unhelpful red box. Error. Authentication. Handshake failed. I clicked the Try Again button. The same red box. I let out a long, slow sigh. It wasn't frustration, not yet. It was weariness. I knew this error. It wasn't a forgotten password. It was deeper. My hand went to the mouse, but I paused. I distrusted the glossy, simplified help wizards that modern software favored. They were designed to herd confused sheep. I was not a sheep. I bypassed the browser entirely and opened a terminal window. The screen was black, the text a comforting green. My fingers, gnarled with a bit of arthritis, found the keys easily. They moved with a speed that would have surprised anyone who saw me tending my roses. I pinged the server. The request came back. The server was online. I checked the network logs. I watched the packets exchange. Sin, ak. And then, right when my machine tried to establish the secure key, nothing. The server just dropped the connection. I ran it again. The exact same result. It was timing out precisely 2.1 seconds into the exchange. This wasn't my computer. It wasn't my internet. This was a server-side problem. Someone had pushed a patch, and they hadn't checked the legacy authentication module. I looked at the company logo on the frozen login screen. Astra Digital. I remembered when we chose the name. I'd argued for Keystone, but the marketing team won. There was nothing for it. I couldn't fix their server from my office. I navigated to the Contact Us page. It was a mess of bright colors and cartoon graphics, all begging me to chat with our AI bot. I hunted for 10 minutes until I finally found a small, grayed-out number under a billing inquiries header. It was the only phone number on the entire site. I picked up my phone, the old, heavy handset of my landline. I hated this part. I hated calling them. I knew exactly what was wrong, but I knew I would have to spend 20 minutes convincing a script reader that I had, in fact, turned my computer on. I took a sip of my tea. It was already getting cold. I dialed the number. The automated voice was pleasant, tinny, and useless. For billing, press 1. For sales, press 2. For technical support, press 3. I pressed 3. All of our agents are currently assisting other customers. Your call is very important to us. Please hold. Muzak filled the line. It was a thin, synthesized version of a song I didn't recognize. I put the phone on speaker and carried my mug to the kitchen. The walk was short. My entire house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I rinsed the mug, poured the dregs of my cold Earl Grey down the drain, and made a second. The smell of the bergamot was sharp and familiar. I carried the steaming mug back to my office, the phone still playing its terrible music. My office was my favorite room. The walls were lined with bookshelves, floor to ceiling. They weren't filled with novels. They were filled with my work. Compiler design and optimization. Principles of modern operating systems. The architecture of kernel-level security. My name was on the spine of all of them. On my desk, next to the monitor, was a framed photo. In it, my late husband, Frank, was squinting into the sun, a ridiculous fishing hat on his head. He was holding up a tiny silver fish, and his smile was a mile wide. Frank had been an engineer, too, but in mechanics. He built bridges. He always said I built invisible ones. He had a patience that I always envied. "Thank you for holding," the tinny voice said. "Your call is now being connected." The music stopped. There was a click, a rustle, and then a voice, startlingly loud and bright. "Tech support. This is Chad. How can I make your day super-duper?" I picked up the handset, clicking off the speaker. "Hello, Chad. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm having an issue with the alumni portal login." "Not a problem, Eleanor," he chirped. "I see you're having trouble logging in. Happens to the best of us. Did you forget your password, ma'am?" "No, I haven't forgotten the password," I said. "The issue isn't user-side. It's a kernel-level timing out error during the SSH key exchange. It seems your latest patch has—" Whoa, slow down, ma'am," Chad interrupted. I heard a sound in the background, like he was leaning back in his chair. "Let's not get tangled in the kernel what's-it, okay? That's very technical. Let's just try the simple stuff first, all right?" I closed my eyes. "Chad," I said, "I have already run a trace." "The problem is, I'm sure you did, ma'am. I tell you what, let's start at the beginning, just to be safe. Sometimes the computer just gets sleepy. Can you find the power button for me? Let's just try turning it off and on again." "I am not restarting my computer," I said, my voice flat. "My machine has an uptime of 94 days. The problem is your server." Okay, no problem," he said, his tone still bright, still slow, as if speaking to a child who was about to have a tantrum. "I'll tell you what. Let's check the password one more time. Sometimes the caps lock key gets stuck. Do you see a little light on your keyboard?" My hand, the one not holding the phone, went to my mouse. I gripped it. My knuckles turned white. "I am a touch typist, Chad. The caps lock is not on." "All right, well, let's just try typing it again for me, but very, very slowly. Sometimes when we get frustrated, our fingers get shaky." I looked at the photo of Frank. He was so patient. He could spend hours waiting for a fish to bite, perfectly content. I tried to channel him. I took a slow breath, smelling the tea. "Chad," I said, trying one last time, "I need you to listen. I am not a confused user. I designed network architecture for this company for 35 years. The authentication handshake is failing. Please escalate this to a level 2 technician. Give them my name. They will understand." There was a short, dismissive puff of air. He laughed. "Ma'am, I know this is frustrating, but my screen here says all our systems are super-duper. The back end is all green. The problem is on your end. It's okay. We just need to get you logged in." He was looking at a dashboard I had helped design the wireframes for in 1998. "Let's try one more time," he said, his tone dripping with fake empathy. "We'll use the mouse. Do you see the big green connect button?" I felt a cold stillness settle over me. This was not about a login anymore. I had had enough. "I really need your help here, ma'am," Chad said, his voice tightening with impatience. "Let's try one more time. I need you to look at your keyboard. Do you see the control key? It usually says control." "Yes," I said. My voice was quiet. "Okay, great. Now, right next to it, do you see the Alt key?" "Yes." "Perfect. You're doing great. Now, a little further away, can you find the Delete key? It might say Del." "I can see it, Chad." "Awesome. Now I need you to press all 3 of them at the same time. This is a little tricky, but it will restart the program for us." He was telling me how to perform a force quit on my own system because he thought I had frozen the login window. That was it. The dam of my professional patience built over 50 years of this exact brand of dismissal, finally broke. "Stop," I said. The word was not loud. It was not a request. It was a command. Chad paused. "Ma'am?" "The problem isn't the button," I said. My voice was different now. The warmth was gone. It was the voice I used to use in boardrooms. It was cold, precise, and carried the weight of absolute authority. The problem is a recursive loop in the kernel you're running, specifically in the auth core.dl driver. It's causing a stack overflow. I heard frantic typing on his end. The click-clack of his keyboard was fast and sudden. "You won't see it on your dashboard," I continued, "because the health check pings the service before the loop is initiated. The flaw is in your new patch, version 8.0.1. It's attempting to verify a deprecated security certificate. The function call is on line 405. The typing stopped. There was complete silence on the line. I could hear his shallow breathing. How do you know that?" he whispered. "You see the comment on that line?" I asked. "The one that says, EV 1995, temp workaround for cert auth. Do not deploy?" More silence. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of my server rack from the closet again. "EV," I said, "is Eleanor Vance. That's me. I wrote that line in 1995 as a temporary fix. I told your predecessor, Michael Shaw, that if it ever made it into a production build, it would crash the entire network during a handshake. Now put your manager on the line." I heard a muffled fumbling, a gasp, the sound of a headset being ripped off. I heard his voice, distant and high-pitched. I don't," she says. She says she wrote it? There was a click. A new voice, sharp and stressed, came on. "This is Sheila, the shift supervisor. To whom am I speaking?" "This is Dr. Eleanor Vance," I said. The line went dead quiet. It was a heavy silence, lasting 3 full seconds. Sheila wasn't looking at a script. She knew the name. Dr. Vance? Sheila's voice was suddenly 2 octaves higher. It was thin with shock. "As in, the Dr. Vance? Ma'am, I am so sorry. Chad is new. He didn't know. He didn't know because he didn't listen," I said. My gaze returned to the blinking cursor on my screen. "Now, Sheila, you have a 5-alarm fire. You need to roll back patch 8.0.1 immediately. Then I want you to give my personal number to your head of engineering. The real one, not the intern. Tell him to call me." "Yes, ma'am." "Right away, Dr. Vance. We are so sorry. I'll get the network team on it right now. And Sheila?" "Yes, ma'am." "Tell Chad," I said, a small, tired smile touching my lips, "that I can, in fact, see the big button." I placed the heavy handset back into its cradle. The click was final. I sat there in the quiet of my office. The light from the window had moved, and it was now illuminating the spines of my books. My awards, small, heavy blocks of crystal and plaques of dark wood, sat on the lower shelf, gathering a respectable amount of dust. The feeling in my chest wasn't triumph. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a quiet, weary satisfaction. The problem was defined. The solution was provided. The cursor on my screen was still blinking, but I knew in about 5 minutes it would finally connect. I sat back in my chair. The adrenaline from the conversation faded, leaving behind the familiar, tired ache in my shoulders. My tea was cold again. I got up and walked to the window. The oak tree's leaves were a deep, late summer green. A squirrel chased another up the trunk, chattering angrily. It was a simple, normal sight. I thought about Chad. He wasn't a bad person. He was just a boy, probably working his first real job, armed with a 3-ring binder of scripts. He had been trained to handle senile old women who couldn't find the any key. He had not been trained to handle the architect of the system he was supporting. My gaze fell on the photo of Frank. He was squinting in the sun, holding that tiny fish. He would have found the whole thing hilarious. "Ellie," he would have said, his voice warm with laughter. "You didn't just rattle him, you reformatted his hard drive." That poor kid is probably hiding under his desk. A small smile touched my face. Frank always knew how to bring me back to earth. He'd been gone for 6 years, but his voice was still the clearest one in my head. The silence of the house was broken by the ringing of the phone. It was sharp, much louder than the muzak had been. I walked back to my desk and picked up the handset. Hello? Dr. Vance? It's Sheila, from Astra Digital, again. Her voice was no longer sharp. It was careful, respectful, and very, very nervous. Hello, Sheila, I said. Ma'am, I just wanted to personally confirm the patch has been rolled back. The network team is running diagnostics now, but the recursive loop is gone. You were exactly right. About everything. Good, I said. That's good to hear. And I wanted to let you know, our head of engineering, David Chen, he is in an emergency meeting about this right now. He asked me to tell you he will be calling your personal number the moment he is out. He sends his profound apologies. David Chen, I said. I remembered him. He was a bright young man back in the day, a junior programmer I had mentored. He'd had a real talent for data structures. He's head of engineering now? Yes, ma'am. For about 5 years. Well, good for him, I said. There was an awkward pause. Dr. Vance, Sheila said, her voice dropping a little. About Chad, the agent you spoke to. He's very shaken up. He's only been here 3 months. He's terribly, terribly sorry, I sighed. I looked at the spines of my books, at a lifetime of solving problems. This was just one more. He was following his script, Sheila, I said. The problem isn't Chad. The problem is that you're training your support staff to listen for keywords, not to listen to the customer. You're training them to assume incompetence. That's the real problem. It wastes his time, and it wastes mine. Yes, ma'am, she said quietly. I understand. I'll bring that up with the training department. I promise. You do that, I said. Thank you for the update. Of course, Dr. Vance. Thank you. We hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment. Then I turned to the monitor. I moved the mouse, my hand steady, and clicked the big green connect button. There was no pause. The wheel spun for half a second, and then the portal loaded. My name appeared in the top right corner. Welcome, Dr. Vance. My pension records, the alumni directory, the technical forums. It was all there. I felt that quiet click of satisfaction. The lock had turned, but the victory felt small. The problem was bigger than one patch, bigger than one nervous boy named Chad. I was in. But now I was waiting for David Chen. I wondered what he would have to say. It had been a long time. I made a fresh cup of tea. The afternoon sun was now angled low, sending long stripes of light across my office floor. I was logged into the portal, browsing the technical forums. The discussions were thin. They were arguing about user interface colors and button placement. No one was talking about architecture. It made me a little sad. The phone rang again. This time I knew who it would be. I picked up the handset on the second ring. Hello? There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in at least a decade, though it was much deeper now. Dr. Vance? Ellie, it's David. David Chen. His voice was strained. He sounded exactly like he had 25 years ago when he'd accidentally deleted the entire test database. Mortified. David, I said. A real smile touched my lips this time. I heard you're running the place now. Congratulations. Ellie, I am so sorry, he rushed out, the words tumbling over each other. I just got out of the meeting. I heard the call. I listened to the whole recording. I am absolutely horrified. There is no excuse, none. Hello, David, I said again, my voice softer. It's good to hear your voice. Even like this. The patch is rolled back. The emergency fix is being tested. You were right. It was a complete rookie mistake. Someone copied that old code block, thought temporary meant fine to use, and bypassed the code review. You didn't just save us a few angry alumni emails. You saved us from a network-wide crash. The authentication kernel is tied into everything. Everything. It would have been a catastrophe. Well, I said, that's what do not deploy means. He let out a shaky breath. I've already spoken to Chad and Sheila. The entire support branch is being retrained starting tomorrow. I promise you this attitude, it's not what we're about, isn't it though? I asked quietly. I leaned forward, resting my elbow on the desk. He called me sweetheart, David. He asked me if I could find the big button. That's not a script problem. That's a culture problem. You trained that boy to assume that any woman with an older-sounding voice is an idiot. You trained him to dismiss me. David was silent. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true, and because it was David. He was one of mine. He was smart enough to understand. You're right, he said finally, his voice low. You're completely right. We've been so focused on user-friendly and streamlining the experience that we've started treating everyone like they're idiots. And we've forgotten who built the house in the first place. The tension broke. He sounded tired. So was I. Is the chili in the cafeteria still terrible on Tuesdays? I asked. I heard him huff, a small, surprised laugh. Ellie, it's worse. They try to make it vegan now. It's an insult to both beans and meat, I laughed. A real warm laugh. Frank always said it tasted like pennies and regret. He was right, David said. His voice was warmer now, too. The boss was gone. The old mentee was back. I miss him. I miss this. Having someone who actually knows what they're talking about. He paused, and I could hear him thinking. Ellie, he said, his tone shifting again. This is going to sound crazy, and you have every right to tell me to go jump in a lake, but we're in trouble, not just with this patch. The entire legacy system, it's a mess. No one here understands it anymore. They just keep building new shiny floors on top of your foundation, and they haven't checked the concrete in 20 years. I knew this. I'd seen it in the forums. We've lost our way, he said. I've lost my way. I could really use your eyes on this if you'd be willing. Just for a few hours a week. As a consultant, we'd pay, of course. Whatever you want. I was stunned. I looked around my quiet office. The books, the dust motes, the photo of Frank squinting into the sun. I had retired. I was done with deadlines and meetings and bad cafeteria chili. David, I said, I'm 72 years old. I'm retired. I'm happy in my garden. I know, he said, his voice earnest. But you saw in 5 minutes what my entire team of 50 engineers missed for 6 weeks. The garden will still be there. I really need your help, Ellie. We need you. An offer. A job. Not because they felt sorry for me, or because they were afraid I'd sue, but because they were lost, and I, apparently, still had the map. A small spark flickered in my chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling, or rather, one I had not felt in a very, very long time. Let me think about it, David, I said. I need to think about it. After I hung up with David, the house felt too quiet. The hum of my server rack in the closet had always been a comforting presence. It was the sound of my home, like a ticking clock. But now, it just sounded idle. It was a powerful machine, sitting there sorting my old emails and backing up my photos. It was a racehorse kept in a petting zoo. I stood up. My knee joint popped in protest. I walked to the kitchen and looked at my cold cup of tea. I didn't want any more. I went to the back door and looked out at my garden. It was a beautiful day. The sun was warm, and the late-season roses were in bloom. I had a lovely red one, Mr. Lincoln, that smelled incredible. I could see from the window that it needed deadheading. There were weeds creeping in near the stone path. Usually that was enough. My garden was my work now. It was a set of simple, solvable problems. You see a weed, you pull it. A branch is dead, you prune it. A flower is spent, you cut it back. There was a direct, physical satisfaction in it. But today, it felt small. Pulling a weed didn't feel like finding a recursive loop in a kernel driver. It didn't use the part of my mind that had just woken up. I went back to my office. I sat in my groaning leather chair. My eyes went to the photo of Frank. A consultant, Frank? I said aloud, my voice quiet in the room. At 72? Can you believe that boy? I could almost hear his reply. He wouldn't have been surprised at all. He would have been leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, with that slow smile of his. Ellie, he would have said, you were always bored with just roses. You need bigger problems. He was right. I was bored. I hadn't realized how bored until my brain snapped into focus during that call. I thought about what David had said. We've forgotten who built the house. He was talking about the code. But I felt it. I was the one who had been forgotten. I had been filed away under retiree, filed away by that boy Chad as senile, a ma'am who needed help finding a big green button. David's offer wasn't charity. It wasn't an apology. It was a rescue. Not for his company, for me. He wasn't offering me a pension check. He was offering me a problem. He was acknowledging that my mind was still useful, still needed. My gaze drifted to the bookshelves. All those books, all that work. My hand went to the spine of my favorite, The Architecture of Kernel-Level Security. I pulled the heavy book off the shelf. It was thick, a dark blue hardcover. I blew a small puff of dust off the top. I opened it. The paper smelled musty and sweet. My fingers, the ones Chad thought were too shaky to type, traced the printed lines of code on a page. It was an algorithm for secure data transmission I developed in 1988. It was complex. It was dense. And as I read it, I realized I remembered every single line. I knew why every choice had been made. I missed this. I hadn't missed the deadlines. I hadn't missed the commute on the highway. I definitely hadn't missed the bad cafeteria chili. But I missed this. The logic, the challenge, the feeling of building something invisible and perfect, something that millions of people used every day without ever knowing it existed. A small, warm spark flickered in my chest. This was better than the cold satisfaction of being right. This was the feeling of being needed. I looked at my own server rack humming in the closet. I looked at my high-speed connection. I didn't need to go to an office. I didn't need to sit in their meetings. I could plug into their entire system from this very chair. I was not a sweetheart. I was not a confused old woman. I was Dr. Eleanor Vance, and my work wasn't done. I closed the book and put it on my desk. I picked up my old physical address book, the one with worn leather and cracked pages. I flipped to see Chen David, his direct line. He'd given it to me when I retired, in case of emergencies. I suppose this qualified. I picked up the heavy landline receiver. My fingers, steady and sure, pressed the numbers. I wasn't going to wait for him. As the line began to ring, I looked at Frank's picture. He was still squinting into the sun, still smiling. All right, Frank, I murmured. Let's go check the foundation. David picked up on the first ring, as if he had been holding the phone. Ellie? Hello, David, I said. I've thought about your offer. I have some terms. Anything, he said immediately. First, I work from here, from my office. You will grant me full administrative access to the entire system. No firewalls, no exceptions. I need to see the whole blueprint. Done, he said. Second, I don't report to a project manager. I report directly to you. We will have one call every Friday afternoon to discuss my findings. I will not be sitting in meetings. I will not be writing quarterly reports. I will be fixing your foundation. Ellie, that's exactly what I want. He sounded almost giddy. And third, I said, looking at the photo of Frank, you will pay me exactly what you pay your top male architect. Not $1 less. There was a half-second of silence. Then he said, I'll have HR email you the contract before lunch. Welcome back, Dr. Vance. My old office changed. It was no longer just a quiet room for reading. It became my command center. The server rack in the closet hummed with a new purpose. its lights blinking as it processed terabytes of data from the Astra Digital mainframe. My desk, once tidy, was now covered in diagrams and notebooks filled with my familiar sharp handwriting. My routine found a new balance. In the mornings, I was in my garden. I wore my old straw hat, the one stained with sweat and soil. I pruned my roses. I pulled the stubborn weeds from the stone path. I felt the sun on my back and the dirt under my fingernails. Then I would come inside, wash my hands, and make a pot of strong Earl Grey tea. In the afternoons, I was in the kernel. I sat in my leather chair, headset on, and I pruned bad code. I found deprecated functions, inefficient algorithms, and security holes that had been patched over with sloppy temporary fixes. I was on video calls almost every day. Not with managers, but with the young engineers. Bright, 20-something programmers who had only ever known the high-level, simplified languages. They had never seen anything like the code I had written. I remember one call with a young woman named Sarah. She was brilliant, but she was stuck. "Dr. Vance," she said, her face pale with stress on my monitor, I just don't understand this data structure. It's not an object, it's not a simple array. I'm afraid if I touch it, the whole thing will collapse. I sipped my tea. "You're looking at line 1088, aren't you?" I asked. She blinked. "How?" "Yes, I am." "That's not a data structure, dear," I explained, pulling my own copy of the code. "It's a memory pointer. We didn't have the processing power you have now. We had to write directly to the hardware stack. Look, you're not trying to change the data. You're trying to change the address of the data." I showed her how. I taught her. I saw the moment she understood. Her eyes widened and a slow smile spread across her face. That's genius," she whispered. "It was necessary," I said. "Now let's fix it." About a month in, Sheila, the supervisor, set up a video call. When the screen flickered on, I saw her, and next to her, in a small windowless cubicle, was Chad. He looked about 15 years old and was pale as a sheet. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice barely audible. I wanted to apologize. What I said. How I treated you. I'm so sorry." I looked at him. He was just a boy, terrified he was going to be fired. "I accept your apology, Chad," I said, my voice even. "But I want you to understand something. It's not about me. It's about your job. You were trained to follow a script, but your real job is to listen. The person on the other end of the line, no matter who they are, always knows something you don't. Your job is to find out what it is. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, nodding quickly. "Yes, Dr. Vance, I will. I promise," I nodded. "Good. Now go learn something." That was 6 months ago. Today, the morning light is soft, just like it was that day. I am in my office. My cup of Earl Grey tea is steaming next to my keyboard. On my main monitor is a new architecture diagram. Not a fix, not a patch. It's a brand new module, something to replace the old creaking 1995 kernel. It's faster, it's more secure, and it's elegant. I typed the final line of code. I read it over one last time. It was good. My hand, steady and sure, moved to the mouse. I clicked the button. It wasn't green and it wasn't big. It was a small, simple text button that read, "Commit." The code was sent. The hum of my server rack was a low, satisfied sound. I leaned back in my chair, the old leather groaning. I sipped my tea. It was perfect. I looked at the photo of Frank. He was still smiling, still squinting into the sun. "We did it, Frank," I whispered. I turned my chair to look out the window. My roses were blooming. The garden was tidy. The house was quiet. But it was no longer idle. It was working. I was working. Everything was in its proper place.